Hi, I'm Maya. And yes, my own sister literally burst into laughter when I told her I got fired. Not a nervous giggle or an awkward chuckle, but full-blown tears in her eyes laughter like I'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. She actually said, "Finally, reality caught up with you." But what Rachel didn't know was that getting fired wasn't my ending. It was my beginning. And 3 weeks later, when she walked into that conference room expecting to charm her way through another interview, she found me sitting at the head of the table. The look on her face when she realized I wasn't there to support her, but to decide her fate? That's a moment I'll never forget. Stick around, because what happened next didn't just change our relationship forever. It taught me that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming who you were always meant to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where it all started, because understanding why Rachel laughed requires understanding how we got to that moment in the first place. Growing up in Denver, Rachel and I were always compared to each other, and somehow I always came up short. She was 3 years older, naturally charismatic, and had this way of commanding attention the moment she walked into any room. I was the quiet one, the one who preferred sketching in notebooks to socializing at parties, the one who our parents would introduce as Maya, she's the creative one, with that particular tone that somehow made creativity sound like a consolation prize. Rachel got her business degree from CU Boulder with a marketing focus and immediately landed a sales position at Sterling Digital Solutions, one of Denver's most prestigious digital marketing firms. Within 2 years, she was their top performer, closing deals that other salespeople could only dream about. She had the corner office on the 15th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains, a company car, and an expense account that seemed limitless. Our parents beamed with pride every time she mentioned another successful quarter or another client dinner at some upscale restaurant in Cherry Creek. Meanwhile, I took the longer path. I studied graphic design and communications at Metro State, working part-time at a local coffee shop to pay for my classes. After graduation, I spent 2 years freelancing, building websites for small businesses and creating marketing materials for local nonprofits. The work was meaningful but inconsistent, and I often found myself explaining to family members why I chose uncertain creative work over a stable corporate job like Rachel's. The truth was, I loved what I did. I loved the process of taking someone's vision and turning it into something visual, something that could connect with people and tell a story. But loving your work doesn't always pay the bills consistently. And after 2 years of financial stress, I decided to look for a full-time position. That's when I applied to Sterling Digital Solutions. Not because Rachel worked there, but because they were known for their innovative campaigns and creative freedom. I went through 3 rounds of interviews and was finally offered a position as a junior marketing specialist in their creative department. The salary wasn't huge, but it was steady, and I was excited about the opportunity to work with bigger clients and learn from experienced professionals. Rachel's reaction when I told her I'd gotten the job was lukewarm at best. "Oh, that's nice," she said, barely looking up from her phone. "Which department?" When I told her it was creative, she nodded with that knowing smile she'd perfected over the years. "That makes sense. You'll probably like working with the art department. It's much more your speed than the business side." The way she said, it made it clear that in her mind, I was still the little sister playing with crayons while she handled the real work of bringing in revenue. Working at Sterling Digital was eye-opening in ways I hadn't expected. The creative department was tucked away on the 8th floor, far from the gleaming sales offices where Rachel spent her days. Our space was open and collaborative, filled with designers, copywriters, and marketing strategists who were passionate about their craft. I quickly realized that while the sales team got the credit and the commission for closing deals, it was our department that created the campaigns, designed the materials, and developed the strategies that made those sales possible. My direct supervisor was David Kim, a seasoned creative director who had been with the company for over 8 years. David was patient, encouraging, and genuinely invested in helping me develop my skills. Under his guidance, I learned to think strategically about design, to understand how visual elements could drive business results, and to present my ideas with confidence. Within 6 months, I was leading smaller projects independently and contributing to major campaigns for clients like Colorado Mountain Brewing and Front Range Financial Services. The problem was, despite my growing competence and the positive feedback from clients, I remained largely invisible to the upper management. In the corporate hierarchy of Sterling Digital, creative was seen as support staff rather than strategic partners. The sales team, led by people like Rachel, were the stars of the company. They had the direct client relationships, they closed the deals, and they got the recognition. We created the tools that enabled their success, but we rarely got credit for the role we played in generating revenue. This dynamic became particularly clear during company meetings and presentations. Rachel would stand at the front of the conference room, effortlessly presenting campaign results and client testimonials, while I and my colleagues from creative sat in the back, watching our work being showcased without acknowledgement. It wasn't that Rachel deliberately excluded us from recognition, but she operated in a world where creative was just another vendor, like the printing company or the catering service. Necessary, but not noteworthy. At family gatherings, this imbalance became even more pronounced. Rachel would regale our parents and relatives with stories of her latest client victories, the prestigious accounts she was managing, and the bonuses she was earning. When someone would politely ask about my work, I'd mention a project I was working on or a successful campaign launch. But somehow my contributions always sounded smaller, less impressive when measured against Rachel's quota achievements and sales figures. "Maya's doing really well with her design work," Rachel would say with what sounded like genuine pride, but felt like subtle condescension. "She's so talented at making things look pretty. The creative team loves working with her." The phrase "making things look pretty" stung every time because it reduced my strategic thinking, market research, and problem-solving to mere decoration. But I learned to smile and nod, accepting that in Rachel's world, and apparently in our family's perception, creative work was inherently less valuable than sales results. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The irony was that I knew, from working closely with various accounts, that many of Rachel's biggest successes were built on campaigns and materials that I had helped develop. The Colorado Mountain Brewing account that she loved to brag about? I had designed the entire visual identity system that helped rebrand them from a small local brewery to a regional powerhouse. The Front Range Financial campaign that won a regional marketing award? I had developed the messaging strategy and created all the visual materials that made their complicated financial products accessible to everyday consumers. But in the story that got told at board meetings and family dinners, these were Rachel's victories, achieved through her relationship-building skills and sales acumen. I didn't resent her success exactly. Rachel worked hard, and she was genuinely good at what she did. She had a gift for understanding what clients wanted to hear and for building the kind of trust that led to long-term business relationships. But I was frustrated by the assumption that her work was inherently more valuable than mine, that generating ideas and creating materials was somehow less important than presenting them to clients and closing deals. This frustration came to a head during the annual performance review cycle in my second year at Sterling Digital. David had submitted a glowing review of my work, highlighting several successful projects and recommending me for a promotion to senior marketing specialist. The promotion would have come with a salary increase, more responsibility, and the opportunity to work directly with clients, rather than always operating through intermediaries. The review meeting was scheduled with Patricia Williams, the HR director, and Michael Torres, the director of business development, who oversaw both creative and sales. I arrived prepared with a portfolio of my work, metrics showing the success of campaigns I had contributed to, and examples of positive client feedback. I was nervous but confident that my track record spoke for itself. The meeting started positively enough. Patricia reviewed David's recommendation and acknowledged the quality of my work. But when the conversation turned to the promotion, Michael's tone shifted. "Maya, there's no question that you're talented and that you've made valuable contributions to the team," he said. "But we need to consider the broader business impact of promotions in the creative department." He went on to explain that the company was facing budget pressures and that they needed to prioritize roles that directly generated revenue. The reality is that while creative work is important, it's the sales team that brings in the business, that keeps all of us employed. We need to make sure our compensation structure reflects that priority. The promotion was denied, and I was told that I should focus on continuing to develop my skills and supporting the sales team more effectively. The feedback felt like a slap in the face, especially knowing that Rachel had received a promotion and a substantial raise just 3 months earlier for exceeding her sales targets using campaigns that I had helped create. That night, I went home to my small apartment in Capitol Hill feeling deflated and questioning whether I was wasting my time at Sterling Digital. I loved the creative work, and I knew I was good at it, but it was becoming clear that no matter how well I performed, I would always be seen as support staff rather than a strategic contributor. The corporate structure seemed designed to ensure that people like Rachel would always be valued more highly than people like me, regardless of the actual impact of our respective contributions. I decided to have a conversation with David about my concerns. He was sympathetic and shared his own frustrations about the way creative was undervalued within the company. "You're not wrong about the dynamics here," he told me. "It's been an ongoing issue for years. The leadership team talks about valuing creativity and innovation, but when it comes to budget decisions and promotions, they always prioritize sales over everything else." David suggested that I might want to consider looking for opportunities at companies that had a more integrated approach to marketing and creative work. There are places where creative professionals are seen as strategic partners rather than service providers, he said. It might be worth exploring what else is out there. I took his advice to heart and started quietly researching other companies in the Denver market. I wasn't actively job hunting, but I wanted to understand what opportunities might exist for someone with my skills and experience. What I found was encouraging. Many companies, particularly in the tech and startup space, were looking for marketing professionals who could combine creative skills with strategic thinking. The role of marketing specialist, or brand strategist, seemed to be evolving in ways that would value my particular combination of design skills and business understanding. But before I could make any decisions about my future, the decision was made for me. It was a Tuesday morning in November, and I arrived at work to find an email requesting that I meet with Patricia Williams in HR at 10 o'clock. The subject line simply read, "Urgent meeting required," which was never a good sign. I spent the morning trying to focus on a campaign I was developing for a new client, but my mind kept wandering to what the meeting might be about. Had I made some mistake on a recent project? Was there a complaint from a client? Or was this about the promotion conversation from a few months earlier? When I arrived at Patricia's office, I found her sitting behind her desk with a manila folder and a serious expression. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Maya, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but we're going to have to let you go. Today will be your last day with Sterling Digital Solutions." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot and then cold, and for a moment I couldn't process what she was saying. "I don't understand," I managed to say. "Is this about my performance? Did I do something wrong?" Patricia's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained professional. "This isn't about your performance, Maya. Your work has been consistently good, and we've had no complaints about your contributions to the team. This is a business decision. We're restructuring the creative department to focus more heavily on digital marketing and automation tools. Several positions are being eliminated, and unfortunately, yours is one of them. She went on to explain that they were moving toward a model where more of the creative work would be outsourced to freelancers or handled by automated systems. The remaining creative staff would focus primarily on digital assets and social media content. My role, which had involved a broader range of strategic and creative work, was no longer aligned with their new direction. I listened in stunned silence as she outlined the severance package, which included 2 weeks of pay and continuation of health insurance for 1 month. She handed me a box for my personal belongings and explained that someone from IT would be by to collect my laptop and access cards. The entire conversation took less than 15 minutes, and just like that, 2 years of my professional life came to an abrupt end. The walk back to my desk felt surreal. My colleagues looked up with curious expressions as I passed, clearly having heard something through the office grapevine. David approached me with a concerned look and quietly asked if I was okay. When I told him what had happened, his face darkened with anger. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're one of the most valuable people on this team. If they wanted to cut costs, there were a dozen other ways to do it that wouldn't have involved losing someone with your skills and potential." I appreciated his support, but I was too numb to feel much of anything beyond shock and embarrassment. I packed my personal items mechanically, said goodbye to the colleagues I was closest to, and walked out of the building that had been my professional home for 2 years. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of Denver traffic and racing thoughts. How was I going to pay rent? How would I explain this to my parents? And perhaps most immediately, how was I going to tell Rachel? I didn't have to wait long to find out. My phone rang as I was sitting in my living room, staring at the box of personal items from my desk. It was Rachel. "Hey, I heard what happened," she said, and I could hear something in her voice that I couldn't quite identify. "Michael Torres mentioned that there were some layoffs in creative today. I'm sorry that happened to you." Her tone was sympathetic, but there was something else underneath it. Something that sounded almost like relief or vindication. I tried to push the feeling aside and focus on the fact that my sister was reaching out to support me during a difficult time. "Yeah, it was pretty sudden," I said. "They said it was about restructuring, not performance, but it's still a shock." "I'm sure it is," Rachel replied. "But maybe this is actually a good thing. Maybe it's time for you to think about what you really want to do with your career. The creative industry is so unstable, and there's so much competition. Maybe you should consider something more practical, more secure." The suggestion stung, but I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. She was probably just worried about my financial stability and trying to be helpful in her own way. "I think I'm going to take some time to figure out my next steps," I said. "There are a lot of opportunities in marketing right now, and I want to make sure I find something that's a good fit." "That's smart," Rachel said. "Take your time. And hey, if you need any advice about job hunting or interviewing, I'm happy to help. I've been through the process a few times now, and I know what employers are looking for." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to process everything that had happened. Getting fired was devastating, but Rachel's response left me feeling even more unsettled. There had been something in her tone, a subtle suggestion that my job loss was somehow inevitable, that I had been playing in a league where I didn't really belong. That evening, I called my parents to break the news. Their reaction was predictably concerned and supportive, but I could hear the underlying worry about my career choices. "Maybe this is an opportunity to think about going back to school," my mother suggested. "Rachel always says that having an MBA really opens doors in the business world." It seemed like everyone in my life was treating my termination as confirmation, that I had been on the wrong path all along. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of Capitol Hill outside my window, I felt something unexpected rising up alongside the fear and uncertainty. It was anger, but not the helpless kind I'd felt during my performance review meeting. This was focused anger, the kind that demanded action rather than acceptance. I had been fired not because I was incompetent, but because I worked in a department that was undervalued and misunderstood. I had spent 2 years creating campaigns and materials that generated real business results, but because I wasn't the person standing in front of clients taking credit for the work, my contributions were seen as expendable. The system was broken, and I had been a victim of that brokenness rather than a failure as a professional. More importantly, I realized that getting fired might actually be the push I needed to find a place where my skills would be truly valued. David had been right when he suggested that there were companies out there with more integrated approaches to marketing and creative work. Maybe it was time to stop trying to succeed within a system that was designed to undervalue people like me and start looking for opportunities where creative strategy was seen as essential rather than optional. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life for months. Instead of wallowing in self-pity or frantically applying for similar positions at other traditional agencies, I was going to take the time to really understand the market and find opportunities that aligned with my strengths and interests. I had severance pay that would cover my basic expenses for a few weeks, and I had savings that could stretch that timeline even further if I was careful. I spent the day researching companies in the Denver area that were known for innovative marketing approaches and strong creative cultures. I made lists of positions that combined creative and strategic responsibilities, and I started reaching out to my network of freelance contacts and former classmates who might have insights about opportunities in the market. What I discovered was encouraging. The marketing landscape was evolving rapidly, and many companies were looking for professionals who could think strategically about brand positioning while also executing creative campaigns. The rigid separation between creative and business functions that defined Sterling Digital was increasingly seen as outdated and ineffective. That realization gave me the confidence to be selective about opportunities rather than just applying for any available position. I wasn't just looking for another job. I was looking for a role where I could use all of my skills and where those skills would be valued appropriately. It was during this research phase that I first learned about Pinnacle Marketing Group. They were a mid-sized firm that specialized in working with technology companies and startups, helping them develop integrated marketing strategies that combined traditional advertising with digital marketing, content creation, and brand development. What caught my attention was their approach to team structure. Instead of separate departments, for creative and strategy, they had integrated teams where strategists, designers, and account managers worked together on every project. I spent hours on their website, reading case studies and trying to understand their culture and approach. They had worked with several companies that I admired, and their campaigns showed a level of creative sophistication and strategic thinking that impressed me. More importantly, their job postings for marketing roles emphasized the importance of creative thinking and strategic insight working together rather than being separate functions. They had an opening for a marketing strategy manager position that seemed almost too good to be true. The job description called for someone with experience in both creative development and strategic planning, someone who could work directly with clients to understand their business objectives and then develop comprehensive campaigns to achieve those objectives. It was exactly the kind of integrated role that I had been hoping to find. But as I read through the requirements and responsibilities, I realized that this wasn't just a step up from my previous role. It was a significant leap. The position required more experience and more responsibility than I had at Sterling Digital. It would involve managing other team members, presenting directly to clients, and taking ownership of campaign results in ways that I had never been asked to do before. For a moment, I felt the familiar self-doubt creeping in. Was I qualified for this kind of role? Did I have the experience and confidence to succeed at this level? But then I thought about all the campaigns I had contributed to at Sterling Digital, all the strategic thinking I had done that had never been recognized or credited. I thought about Rachel's easy confidence in client meetings and presentations, and I realized that the main difference between us wasn't ability. It was opportunity and recognition. I had been creating strategic marketing solutions for 2 years. I just hadn't been given credit for it or allowed to present it directly. Maybe it was time to find a place where I could do that work and get the recognition it deserved. I spent the next week crafting my application for the Pinnacle marketing position. Instead of simply listing my previous responsibilities, I focused on the results I had achieved and the strategic thinking behind my creative work. I included case studies that showed how my design decisions had contributed to measurable business outcomes, and I wrote a cover letter that positioned me not as a creative who was trying to move into strategy, but as a strategic thinker who happened to have strong creative skills. The application process was more intensive than anything I had experienced before. After my initial submission was accepted, I had a phone screening with their HR team, followed by a portfolio review with their creative director, and then a strategic thinking exercise where I was asked to develop a marketing approach for a hypothetical client. Each step of the process reinforced my growing confidence that this was the kind of environment where I could thrive. The questions I was asked were sophisticated and thoughtful, focused on how I approached problems and developed solutions rather than just what software I could use or what campaigns I had worked on. They seemed genuinely interested in understanding how I thought about marketing challenges, not just what I had done in previous roles. The final interview was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after I had been fired from Sterling Digital. I would be meeting with Jennifer Liu, the marketing director who would be my direct supervisor, and Robert Martinez, the CEO of Pinnacle Marketing Group. The interview would last 2 hours and would include a presentation of my strategic approach to a real client challenge that they were currently working on. I spent days preparing for that interview, researching the client, developing a comprehensive strategy, and creating presentation materials that showcased both my creative and strategic capabilities. I practiced my presentation until I could deliver it confidently and handle any questions they might throw at me. On the morning of the interview, I woke up feeling nervous but excited. This was my chance to show that I could operate at a higher level than I had been allowed to at Sterling Digital. It was my opportunity to prove that getting fired hadn't been about my limitations, but about the limitations of the environment I had been working in. I chose my outfit carefully, professional but creative, confident but not flashy. I wanted to look like someone who could handle client presentations and strategic discussions while still maintaining the creative sensibility that was central to my approach to marketing. As I drove toward the Pinnacle marketing offices in the Denver Tech Center, I felt a calm confidence that I hadn't experienced in years. Whatever happened in this interview, I was proud of the work I had done to get here and the way I had responded to getting fired. Instead of letting it defeat me or convince me to settle for something safer, I had used it as motivation to reach for something better. I arrived at Pinnacle Marketing 15 minutes early and used the time to review my notes one final time and center myself before the interview. The receptionist was friendly and professional, and the office environment felt immediately different from Sterling Digital. Instead of rigid departmental divisions, I could see collaborative workspaces where people from different disciplines were working together on projects. The energy was creative but focused, innovative but grounded in business results. When Jennifer Liu came out to greet me, I felt an immediate sense of connection. She was warm and professional, and her questions during our initial conversation showed that she had thoroughly reviewed my application and understood the strategic thinking behind my previous work. She seemed genuinely excited about the possibility of adding someone with my background to their team. The presentation went better than I had dared to hope. I was able to articulate my strategic approach clearly and confidently, and both Jennifer and Robert asked thoughtful questions that showed they were engaged with my ideas. They seemed impressed not just with my creative concepts, but with the business reasoning behind my recommendations. As the interview concluded, Jennifer smiled and said, "Maya, I have to say, your approach to this challenge is exactly what we're looking for. All of those experiences had been preparing me for this moment, teaching me to recognize my own value even when others couldn't see it. Getting fired from Sterling Digital hadn't been a failure. It had been a necessary step toward finding a place where my skills could be fully utilized. By the time I returned home, I was ready to start preparing for my new role. I spent the afternoon researching Pinnacle Marketing's client base and current projects, trying to understand the challenges and opportunities I'd be inheriting as department head. The more I learned, the more excited I became about the possibilities ahead. That evening, I finally called my parents to share the news. Their reaction was everything I had hoped for: proud, excited, and maybe a little surprised at how quickly things had turned around. "Maya, this is wonderful," my mother said. "Department head after just 3 weeks of job searching. That's incredible." "Have you told Rachel yet?" my father asked. "She'll be so proud of you." I promised I would call her soon, though I wasn't entirely sure how that conversation would go. Rachel had always been supportive in her own way, but I wondered how she would react to her little sister suddenly leaping ahead in terms of job title and responsibility. The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. I met with Jennifer and Robert to discuss the scope of my new role and had individual conversations with each of my future team members. What impressed me most was how collaborative and talented they were. Instead of the departmental silos that had defined Sterling Digital, Pinnacle Marketing operated as an integrated unit where everyone's expertise was valued and utilized. Friday afternoon, Jennifer pulled me aside after our team meeting. "Maya, there's something I wanted to mention. We've been contacted by Sterling Digital Solutions about potentially working together on a few projects. Apparently, they're looking to outsource some of their creative strategy work after some recent restructuring." My stomach dropped. Sterling Digital was reaching out to Pinnacle Marketing for the exact services they had just eliminated when they fired me and restructured the creative department. The irony was almost too much to process. "We haven't committed to anything yet," Jennifer continued, "but Robert thought it might be an interesting opportunity, especially given your background there. You'd probably have valuable insights about their client base and internal processes." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral while my mind raced through the implications. "I'd be happy to provide context about their operations and client relationships if that would be helpful. Actually, they've requested a meeting to discuss potential collaboration. Would you be willing to sit in on that conversation? Your perspective could be really valuable as we evaluate whether this partnership makes sense for us." The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday afternoon. I spent the weekend alternating between excitement and anxiety about the prospect of facing my former colleagues as a representative of a competing firm. There was a part of me that relished the opportunity to show Sterling Digital what they had lost when they fired me. But I also knew I needed to handle the situation professionally and focus on what was best for Pinnacle Marketing. Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office early and spent time reviewing Sterling Digital's current client roster and recent performance metrics. I wanted to be thoroughly prepared to provide strategic insights about potential collaboration opportunities. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock in our main conference room. At 1:45, I was reviewing my notes when Jennifer knocked on my office door. "Maya, they're here for the Sterling Digital meeting. Are you ready?" I gathered my materials and followed Jennifer down the hallway toward the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see several figures seated around the table, but the angle prevented me from identifying specific individuals. Jennifer opened the door and gestured for me to enter first. "I'd like you to meet Maya Chen, our new department head for integrated marketing solutions. Maya has extensive experience with strategic campaign development and will be leading our evaluation of potential partnership opportunities." I stepped into the room with confidence, ready to introduce myself to the Sterling Digital team. But as I looked around the table, my professional composure nearly cracked. Sitting directly across from me, looking equally shocked, was Rachel. She was flanked by Michael Torres, whom I recognized as the Director of Business Development who had overseen my performance review, and Patricia Williams from HR. But it was Rachel's presence that made my heart pound, and my carefully prepared talking points temporarily evaporate from my mind. Maya? Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper, and her usual confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious confusion. "What are you doing here?" Jennifer looked between us with raised eyebrows. "I take it you two know each other?" "Rachel is my sister," I said, finding my voice and managing to keep it steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. I moved to take my seat at the head of the table, directly across from Rachel. I wasn't aware that Sterling Digital would be sending someone from their sales team to discuss creative strategy partnerships. Michael Torres cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the meeting. "We brought Rachel because she has the strongest relationships with our major clients and can speak to their strategic needs. We thought her client insights would be valuable for this discussion." I nodded professionally, though internally I was marveling at the situation. Rachel, who had always dismissed creative work as making things look pretty, was now Sterling Digital's representative for discussing creative strategy partnerships. The company that had fired me for being part of an allegedly unnecessary creative department was now seeking to outsource that same work to firms like Pinnacle Marketing. "That makes sense," I replied. "Client relationships are certainly important when evaluating potential collaborations. Perhaps we should start by discussing what specific services Sterling Digital is looking to partner on." For the next hour, I found myself in the strange position of professionally evaluating partnership opportunities with my former employer, while my sister sat across the table, still clearly struggling to process my presence in this context. Rachel, who was usually the most confident person in any business meeting, seemed subdued and uncertain. As Michael Torres outlined Sterling Digital's need for strategic creative services, I took detailed notes and asked pointed questions about their client requirements, budget parameters, and timeline expectations. It became increasingly clear that they were seeking exactly the kind of integrated marketing strategy that I had been trying to provide internally before I was fired. "One of our challenges," Patricia Williams admitted, "is that our recent restructuring has created some gaps in our strategic creative capabilities. We're looking for partners who can provide the kind of comprehensive campaign development that we used to handle internally." I glanced at Rachel, who was staring at her hands rather than making eye contact. The irony of the situation was apparently not lost on her either. "I think I understand your needs," I said diplomatically. "Pinnacle Marketing specializes in exactly the kind of integrated approach you're describing. We can certainly develop some proposals for how we might support Sterling Digital's client objectives." The meeting concluded with agreements about next steps and follow-up communications. As everyone prepared to leave, Rachel lingered behind, while Michael and Patricia gathered their materials. "Maya, can we talk for a minute?" she asked quietly. I nodded to Jennifer that I would catch up with her later and waited until the others had left the conference room. "I had no idea, Rachel," I began, her usual composure replaced by something I'd rarely seen from her: vulnerability. "When they told me we were meeting with Pinnacle Marketing about creative partnerships, I never imagined you'd be here. I thought you were still job hunting." "I started here Monday," I replied simply. "It's been a busy week." Rachel shook her head slowly, as if trying to process the information. "Department head? Maya, how did this happen so quickly? 3 weeks ago, you were unemployed." There was something in her tone that I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't exactly accusatory, but it wasn't celebratory either. It was as if she couldn't reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the professional she had just encountered in a business meeting. "Sometimes opportunities come along when you're ready for them," I said. "Sterling Digital was never going to be the right fit for me long term. Getting fired forced me to look for something better." "But department head," Rachel repeated. "That's a bigger title than I have at Sterling Digital. How is that possible?" And there it was, the question that revealed what was really bothering her. Rachel had always been the successful sister, the one with the impressive job title, and the corporate achievements. My sudden leap to a leadership position had disrupted the family narrative that had defined our relationship for years. Pinnacle Marketing values strategic creative thinking differently than Sterling Digital does, I explained. They were looking for someone who could integrate creative and business strategy, and apparently my background was a good fit for what they needed. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing not just my new position, but what it meant for how she had always viewed our respective careers. "I should go," she finally said. "Michael and Patricia are waiting for me in the lobby." As she moved toward the door, she paused and turned back. "Maya, I'm happy for you. I really am. This is just unexpected." After she left, I sat alone in the conference room, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 2 hours, I had gone from being Rachel's unemployed younger sister to being in a position where Sterling Digital needed my professional expertise. The power dynamic that had defined our relationship for years had shifted in a way that neither of us had anticipated. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking constantly about that moment when Rachel realized I was sitting at the head of the table. The look of confusion and disbelief on her face had been genuine, and I began to understand that my career transformation was challenging her assumptions about both of our professional trajectories. The following Monday, Jennifer scheduled a follow-up meeting to review our assessment of the Sterling Digital partnership opportunity. After analyzing their client needs and budget parameters, our team had concluded that while there were potential opportunities for collaboration, Sterling Digital's approach to creative services was fundamentally misaligned with Pinnacle Marketing's integrated methodology. Their request feels like they want to outsource the same disconnected creative services that led to their restructuring problems in the first place, I explained to Jennifer and Robert. They're not really looking for strategic partnership. They're looking for a vendor to produce creative materials without strategic input. Robert nodded thoughtfully. That's consistent with what I observed during the meeting. They seemed to view creative work as a commodity service rather than strategic consultation. "What do you recommend?" Jennifer asked. I had spent considerable time thinking about this decision, knowing that my recommendation would essentially be declining to work with my former employer and, by extension, with Rachel. But my responsibility was to Pinnacle Marketing and our clients, not to family dynamics or personal relationships. "I think we should pass on this opportunity," I said. "Sterling Digital's approach to creative services is exactly what we've positioned ourselves against. Taking on this partnership would compromise our methodology and potentially confuse our market position." Both Jennifer and Robert agreed with my assessment, and we decided to decline Sterling Digital's proposal politely but firmly. I volunteered to make the call to Michael Torres, knowing that it would likely get back to Rachel but feeling confident that it was the right business decision. The conversation with Michael was brief and professional. He seemed disappointed, but not entirely surprised by our decision. "I understand your position," he said. "Perhaps our organizations have different approaches to creative services." "That seems to be the case," I agreed. "But I appreciate the opportunity to explore potential collaboration." After we hung up, I felt a sense of closure about my relationship with Sterling Digital. They had fired me because they didn't value strategic creative thinking, and now they were seeking to outsource that same capability because they had realized its importance. My recommendation to decline their partnership proposal felt like the final chapter in that particular story. What I didn't anticipate was how this decision would affect my relationship with Rachel. That evening, my phone rang with her number on the display. "Maya, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning?" Her tone was tense, and I could tell this wasn't going to be a casual, sisterly conversation. "Of course. Mountain Grounds on Colfax at 9? See you there." Mountain Grounds was a coffee shop we had both frequented during college, neutral, territory where we had had some of our most honest conversations over the years. I arrived a few minutes early and chose a corner table where we could talk privately. Rachel walked in exactly at 9, looking more serious than I had seen her in years. She ordered her usual vanilla latte and joined me at the table without the small talk that usually preceded our conversations. "Michael told me that Pinnacle Marketing declined our partnership proposal," she said immediately. "He said the decision came from their department head. That was you, wasn't it?" I nodded. "Yes, I made the recommendation to decline. It wasn't personal, Rachel. It was a business decision based on strategic alignment." Strategic alignment? Rachel's voice rose slightly, and I could see other customers glancing in our direction. "Maya, do you realize what you just did? That partnership could have been worth 6 figures in annual business for Sterling Digital. My clients were counting on access to those creative services." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I used to get when Rachel would criticize my choices or question my judgment. But this time, instead of shrinking back or apologizing, I found myself responding with calm confidence. "Rachel, I understand the financial implications, but Pinnacle Marketing's responsibility is to our own clients and our strategic positioning. Sterling Digital's approach to creative services isn't compatible with our methodology." "Your methodology?" Rachel shook her head incredulously. "Maya, 6 weeks ago you were designing brochures and updating websites. Now you're talking about strategic methodology like you're some kind of business consultant." There it was, the dismissive tone that had defined so many of our interactions over the years. The suggestion that I was somehow overstepping my bounds by taking my new role. Seriously? 6 weeks ago, I was developing comprehensive marketing strategies that Sterling Digital's sales team, including you, were using to close deals, I replied evenly. The only difference is that now I work for an organization that recognizes and values that strategic thinking. Rachel stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with something she wasn't ready to articulate. Finally, she spoke in a quieter voice. "This is really hard for me, Maya. For years, I've been the successful one in our family, the one with the corporate job and the impressive clients. And now suddenly you have a bigger title than I do, and you're in a position to make decisions that affect my career." Her honesty caught me off guard, and for the first time in the conversation, I felt empathy rather than defensiveness. "Rachel, I never wanted this to be competitive between us. I'm not trying to diminish your success or make your job harder. I'm just trying to build a career where my skills are valued and utilized." "But it is competitive," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Maybe it always has been, and I just never thought you were real competition before." The words stung, but they also revealed something important about how Rachel had always viewed our relationship. I hadn't been her sister who happened to work in a different field. I had been her sister who worked in a lesser field, someone who could be supportive and admiring without being threatening. "I think we both need to adjust to this new dynamic," I said carefully. "But I hope we can figure out how to support each other's careers without it being about competition." Rachel nodded, but I could see that she was still processing the implications of my career transformation. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering familiar ground about family expectations and professional choices, but with a new undercurrent of uncertainty about our respective roles. As we prepared to leave, Rachel made one final comment that stayed with me for days afterward. "You know, Maya, part of me is proud of you for landing this position, but part of me is also scared about what it means for us as sisters." Walking back to my car after our coffee meeting, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 month. I had gone from being the undervalued creative sister to being a department head with decision-making authority that could affect Rachel's career. The power dynamic that had shaped our relationship for years had been fundamentally altered, and neither of us was entirely sure how to navigate this new reality. But as I drove to my office that morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced: in years of family gatherings and professional interactions with Rachel. For the first time, I felt like we were meeting as equals, two professionals with different strengths and different challenges, rather than as the successful sister and her struggling creative sibling. It was uncomfortable and uncertain, but it was also honest in a way our relationship had never been before. And as I prepared for another day of leading my team and working with clients who valued my strategic thinking, I realized that this discomfort was the price of finally being seen for who I really was, both professionally and personally. The question now was whether Rachel and I could build a new kind of relationship based on this more honest foundation, or whether the shift in our professional dynamics would create a permanent strain between us. Only time would tell, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to find out. The following weeks at Pinnacle Marketing unfolded like a masterclass in what my career could have been all along. Every morning, I walked into an office where my ideas weren't just heard but actively sought out. My team of 4 marketing strategists and creative professionals looked to me for guidance on complex client challenges, and I found myself thriving in ways I never had at Sterling Digital. My first major test came with the Morrison Tech account, the same client challenge I had presented during my interview. Morrison was a mid-sized software company looking to rebrand and expand into new markets, and they needed a comprehensive strategy that would integrate their visual identity, messaging, and digital presence. At Sterling Digital, this kind of project would have been fragmented across multiple departments, with creative developing materials based on secondhand information from sales meetings. At Pinnacle Marketing, I was the primary client contact, responsible for understanding their business objectives and translating them into actionable marketing strategy. The initial client meeting took place in Morrison Tech's Boulder office, a converted warehouse space with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out toward the Flatirons. I arrived 30 minutes early, using the time to review my notes and center myself for what felt like the most important presentation of my career. Jennifer had offered to attend the meeting with me, but I had declined. This was my account, my strategy, and my opportunity to prove that the confidence Pinnacle Marketing had shown in promoting me to department head was justified. When the Morrison Tech team filed into their conference room, I stood to greet them, with the kind of professional assurance I had never felt in similar situations at Sterling Digital. The presentation lasted 90 minutes, during which I walked them through a comprehensive rebranding strategy that addressed everything from their core messaging to their social media presence. But more importantly, I was able to articulate how each element of the strategy connected to their business objectives and revenue goals. Instead of just showing them what we could create, I was explaining why each creative decision would help them achieve measurable business results. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Morrison Tech's CEO, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, leaned forward as I concluded my presentation. "Maya, this is exactly what we've been looking for. You clearly understand not just our creative needs, but our business challenges. When can we get started?" By the end of the meeting, I had secured a 6-month contract worth more than I had ever been responsible for at Sterling Digital. As I drove back to Denver, I felt a profound sense of validation. This was what I had been capable of all along. I just needed to be in an environment that recognized and nurtured those capabilities. Back at the office, Jennifer was waiting with barely contained excitement. "How did it go?" she asked before I had even reached my desk. "They signed the contract," I said, trying to keep my voice professional despite my elation. 6 months, full strategic rebranding with quarterly performance reviews. Jennifer's face broke into a huge smile. "Maya, that's incredible. Morrison Tech has been a target client for us for over a year. The fact that you closed them on your first major presentation speaks volumes about your capabilities." Word of the Morrison Tech success spread quickly through the office, and over the next few days, I found myself fielding congratulations from colleagues who seemed genuinely impressed by what I had achieved. It was a stark contrast to Sterling Digital, where individual achievements were rarely acknowledged unless they directly benefited the sales team's metrics. But the real validation came the following week, when Robert Martinez pulled me aside after our weekly leadership meeting. "Maya, I want you to know that your work with Morrison Tech has already exceeded our expectations. Jennifer and I have been discussing expanding your role to include oversight of our technology sector accounts. The promotion would mean managing a larger team and taking responsibility for some of Pinnacle Marketing's most significant client relationships. It was an opportunity that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier, when I was being denied a promotion from junior to senior marketing specialist. I'm honored by your confidence in me," I replied. "What would the timeline look like for this transition?" "We're thinking about implementing the change at the beginning of next quarter. That would give you time to fully establish the Morrisons' tech relationship and prepare for the additional responsibilities." As Robert outlined the scope of the expanded role, I found myself thinking about all the family gatherings where I had sat quietly, while Rachel regaled everyone with stories of her latest professional achievements. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now being offered opportunities that exceeded anything she had achieved at Sterling Digital, and it was happening because I had finally found an environment where my particular combination of creative and strategic skills was valued. That evening, I called my parents to share the news about the Morrison Tech contract and the potential promotion. Their reaction was everything I could have hoped for: proud, excited, and perhaps a little surprised by how quickly my career had transformed. "Maya, this is wonderful," my mother said. "It sounds like this new company really appreciates your talents." "Have you told Rachel about your success?" my father asked. "I'm sure she'd love to hear how well you're doing." I hesitated before answering. Rachel and I had spoken only briefly since our tense coffee meeting, and our conversations had been stilted and careful. I wasn't sure how she would react to news of my continued professional advancement, especially given her comments about our relationship becoming competitive. "I haven't had a chance to update her yet," I said diplomatically, "but I'll reach out to her soon." The truth was, I was apprehensive about sharing my success with Rachel. Our entire relationship had been built on a foundation where she was the professionally successful sister and I was the creative one still finding my way. My rapid ascent at Pinnacle Marketing had already disrupted that dynamic, and I wasn't sure how much more disruption our relationship could handle. My reluctance to contact Rachel was tested the following Friday, when she called me unexpectedly in the late afternoon. "Maya, do you have a few minutes to talk?" Her voice sounded strained, and I could hear office noise in the background. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Not really." Rachel paused, and when she continued, her usual confidence was replaced by something that sounded almost like desperation. "I need to ask you for a favor, and I'm not sure how you're going to react to it." I felt my stomach tighten. Whatever Rachel was about to ask, her tone suggested it was significant and potentially complicated. "What's going on, Rachel?" "Sterling Digital is in trouble, bigger trouble than I think most people realize." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, and I could tell she was trying to have this conversation without being overheard by her colleagues. "The restructuring that led to your firing wasn't just about cutting costs. We're losing clients because we can't deliver the kind of integrated marketing strategies that companies are demanding." I waited for her to continue, sensing that there was more to this story than she had initially revealed. 3 of our biggest accounts have terminated their contracts in the past month. They're all saying the same thing, that our creative materials look good but don't connect to their business objectives. Without the strategic creative thinking that your department used to provide, we're essentially just a sales team trying to sell services we can't actually deliver. The irony was almost overwhelming. Sterling Digital had fired me and eliminated the creative strategy department because they viewed it as non-essential overhead. Now they were losing clients because they couldn't provide the strategic creative services that I had been trying to tell them were crucial to their success. "I'm sorry to hear about Sterling Digital's challenges," I said carefully. but I'm not sure how I can help. Maya, I know this is awkward given everything that's happened, but I need to ask if Pinnacle Marketing would reconsider the partnership we discussed. I know you recommended against it, but our situation has changed dramatically since then. There it was. Rachel was asking me to reverse my professional recommendation in order to help save her company and, by extension, her job. The request put me in an impossible position. Either I compromised my professional judgment to help my sister, or I maintained my standards and potentially watched her career suffer. Rachel, my assessment of the partnership opportunity was based on strategic alignment, not personal considerations. Sterling Digital's approach to creative services still isn't compatible with how Pinnacle Marketing operates. But what if we changed our approach? Rachel's voice became more urgent. What if we restructured how we work with creative partners? What if we gave Pinnacle Marketing full strategic control over campaign development? I found myself considering her proposal, not because of family loyalty, but because it actually addressed the fundamental concerns I had raised about the original partnership opportunity. If Sterling Digital was willing to cede strategic control to Pinnacle Marketing, it could potentially work as a collaboration. That would be a very different kind of partnership than what was originally proposed, I said. It would essentially mean Sterling Digital functioning as a sales and account management firm while Pinnacle Marketing handled strategy and execution. Yes, exactly. We'd be the client relationship managers, and you'd be the strategic and creative experts. The arrangement Rachel was describing would actually play to each company's strengths while addressing Sterling Digital's current weaknesses. It was also, I realized, exactly the kind of integrated approach that I had been advocating for during my time at Sterling Digital. Rachel, I can't make any commitments over the phone, but I'm willing to discuss this revised approach with my team. If Sterling Digital is genuinely ready to operate as a strategic partner, rather than trying to outsource creative services, there might be an opportunity for collaboration. The relief in Rachel's voice was palpable. Maya, thank you. I know this is complicated because of our relationship, but I really believe this could be beneficial for both companies. After we ended the call, I sat in my office trying to process what had just happened. My sister, who had always been the successful one in our family, had just asked me to help save her career. The power dynamic between us had shifted so dramatically that she now needed my professional expertise and decision-making authority to salvage her company's prospects. But more than the personal implications, I was intrigued by the business opportunity Rachel had outlined. A partnership where Sterling Digital handled client relationships while Pinnacle Marketing provided strategic direction could actually be innovative and mutually beneficial. It would allow us to access Sterling Digital's established client base, while providing them with the strategic capabilities they desperately needed. I spent the weekend developing a preliminary framework for how such a partnership might work. Instead of the vendor relationship that Sterling Digital had originally proposed, this would be a true strategic alliance where both companies contributed their core competencies to deliver comprehensive marketing solutions. Monday morning, I requested a meeting with Jennifer and Robert to discuss the revised partnership opportunity. I was careful to present it as a business proposition rather than a personal favor, focusing on the strategic benefits for Pinnacle Marketing rather than Sterling Digital's desperate circumstances. The original proposal didn't work because Sterling Digital wanted to outsource creative services while maintaining strategic control, I explained. But if they're willing to cede strategic authority to us while handling client relationship management, it could actually be a very powerful combination. Robert leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. So we'd essentially be expanding our client base by partnering with Sterling Digital's sales team? Exactly. We'd gain access to their established client relationships, and they'd gain access to our strategic capabilities. It's a true partnership rather than a vendor relationship. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. It would also allow us to scale more quickly than we could by developing new client relationships entirely on our own. After an hour of discussion, we agreed to pursue the partnership opportunity, but with strict parameters around strategic control and quality standards. I would be the primary point of contact for the partnership, ensuring that Pinnacle Marketing's methodology and standards were maintained throughout any collaborative projects. The next step was setting up a meeting with Sterling Digital to outline our requirements for the partnership. Unlike our previous meeting, this time I would be clearly in control of the agenda and the terms of any potential collaboration. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at Pinnacle Marketing's offices. I arrived early to set up the conference room and review my presentation materials one final time. This wasn't just about business partnership. It was about establishing my professional authority in a relationship with my former employer and my sister. When the Sterling Digital team arrived, I was struck by how different the dynamic felt compared to our previous meeting. Michael Torres and Patricia Williams looked somewhat subdued, and Rachel appeared nervous in a way I had never seen before. They were coming to us as the party in need, seeking our expertise and partnership to solve their business challenges. I began the meeting by outlining Pinnacle Marketing's assessment of Sterling Digital's current situation and our understanding of their partnership needs. Instead of the diplomatic language I had used in our previous interaction, I was direct and specific about the challenges Sterling Digital was facing and how a partnership with us could address those challenges. Based on our analysis of your recent client losses and market positioning, it's clear that Sterling Digital needs strategic creative capabilities that you currently don't have in-house, I said, looking directly at Michael Torres. We're prepared to provide those capabilities, but only under a partnership structure that ensures strategic alignment and quality control. I then presented our framework for the partnership, which included Pinnacle Marketing having final approval over all strategic decisions, creative materials, and client communications. Sterling Digital would be responsible for client relationship management and sales, but they would not have the authority to modify or override our strategic recommendations. The terms were more stringent than anything Sterling Digital had probably expected, but they were also clearly necessary given their current circumstances. As I outlined each requirement, I could see Rachel taking detailed notes and occasionally exchanging glances with Michael and Patricia. These terms would represent a significant change in how Sterling Digital has traditionally operated, Michael said when I finished my presentation. We've always maintained direct control over client strategy and campaign development. And that approach has led to your current situation, I replied diplomatically but firmly. If you want to access Pinnacle Marketing's strategic capabilities, you need to be willing to trust our methodology and expertise. The meeting continued for another hour, during which we discussed specific implementation details and performance metrics. By the end, it was clear that Sterling Digital was genuinely interested in moving forward with the partnership, despite the significant concessions it would require from their traditional operating model. As the meeting concluded, Rachel lingered behind while Michael and Patricia gathered their materials. When we were alone in the conference room, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, something that mixed gratitude with what looked like newfound respect. Maya, I want you to know that I understand what you're doing here. You're not just helping Sterling Digital, you're essentially saving my career. I considered her words carefully before responding. Rachel, I'm making a business decision that I believe will benefit Pinnacle Marketing. The fact that it also helps Sterling Digital is secondary to our strategic objectives. She nodded slowly. I know you have to say that, but I also know that you could have easily refused to reconsider this partnership. The fact that you were willing to look at a revised approach means a lot to me. I hope you understand that if we move forward with this partnership, our professional relationship is going to be very different from what either of us is used to, I said. I'll be in a position of strategic authority over projects that affect your clients and your performance metrics. I understand, Rachel replied. And honestly, after seeing what you've accomplished at Pinnacle Marketing, I'm not sure anyone is better qualified to be in that position. Her acknowledgement felt like a watershed moment in our relationship. For the first time in our adult lives, Rachel was explicitly recognizing my professional capabilities and authority. It wasn't grudging or qualified. It was genuine respect, from one professional to another. The partnership agreement was finalized 2 weeks later, and implementation began immediately with 3 pilot projects involving Sterling Digital's remaining major clients. As the strategic lead for all partnership projects, I found myself in the unprecedented position of having direct authority over work that would determine Rachel's success or failure at Sterling Digital. The first project was a comprehensive rebranding campaign for one of Sterling Digital's longest-standing clients, a regional construction company that was expanding into new markets. Under the traditional Sterling Digital model, Rachel would have handled all client communications and strategic decisions, with creative work being outsourced to various vendors. Under our partnership model, I was the primary strategic contact, with Rachel serving as the relationship manager who implemented my recommendations. The shift in our professional dynamic was immediately apparent during our first joint client meeting. Instead of Rachel leading the presentation while I provided support, I was presenting the strategic approach while Rachel focused on client relationship management and project coordination. It was a complete reversal of our traditional roles, and one that required both of us to adapt to new ways of working together. What surprised me was how naturally Rachel adapted to the new dynamic. Instead of resisting my strategic authority or trying to maintain control over creative decisions, she focused on what she had always been best at: building client relationships and ensuring smooth project execution. The result was a more effective collaboration than either of us had expected. The construction company rebranding project was completed on schedule and exceeded the client's expectations for both creative quality and strategic impact. More importantly, it demonstrated that the partnership model could work effectively when both companies focused on their core competencies. Word of the successful collaboration spread quickly through both organizations and, apparently, through Denver's marketing community. Within a month of completing the first project, Pinnacle Marketing was receiving inquiries from other companies interested in similar strategic partnerships. The success of the Sterling Digital partnership also had unexpected effects on my standing within Pinnacle Marketing. Robert Martinez began including me in senior leadership discussions about company strategy and growth planning. Jennifer started referring to me as her strategic partner rather than just a department head. And most significantly, I was invited to present our partnership model at a regional marketing conference as an example of innovative collaboration in the industry. The conference presentation was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in late February, nearly 4 months after I had been fired from Sterling Digital. As I prepared my remarks, I reflected on how dramatically my professional life had transformed. I was no longer the undervalued creative worker whose strategic contributions went unrecognized. I had become a strategic leader whose expertise was sought after by other companies and whose partnership model was being studied as an industry innovation. The presentation went exceptionally well, with significant interest from other marketing firms and corporate marketing departments. During the networking reception afterward, I was approached by several senior executives who wanted to discuss potential consulting opportunities and strategic partnerships. But the most meaningful moment came when Jennifer approached me near the end of the reception. "Maya, I want you to know that watching you present our partnership model today made me realize something important," she said. "You haven't just become a successful department head. You've become a strategic thinker whose expertise extends far beyond any single company or project." Her words crystallized something I had been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. My career transformation hadn't just been about finding a better job or getting a more impressive title. It had been about finally being able to use all of my capabilities and having those capabilities recognized and valued by others. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. 8 months earlier, I had been sitting in Patricia Williams's office, being told that my position was being eliminated because creative strategy wasn't aligned with Sterling Digital's business model. Now I was presenting that same strategic approach as an industry innovation, and my former employer was dependent on my expertise for their survival. The transformation felt almost surreal, but it also felt earned. Every frustrating meeting where my ideas had been dismissed, every performance review where I had been told to focus on supporting others rather than leading, every family gathering where my contributions had been minimized, all of those experiences had prepared me for this moment when I finally had the opportunity to show what I was truly capable of achieving. But perhaps most importantly, the journey had taught me that my value wasn't dependent on others recognizing it. The skills and strategic thinking that made me successful at Pinnacle Marketing had always been there. The only thing that had changed was my environment and my willingness to seek out situations where those capabilities could be fully utilized. As I pulled into my driveway that evening, I realized that Rachel was right about one thing. Our relationship as sisters had become competitive. But it wasn't the destructive competition she had initially feared. Instead, it had become the kind of competition that pushed both of us to be better professionals and, ultimately, better versions of ourselves. Spring arrived in Denver with an energy that matched my growing confidence at work. The partnership with Sterling Digital had been running smoothly for 3 months, and what had started as a desperate attempt to save Rachel's company had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. The collaboration was generating impressive results not just for our shared clients, but for both companies individually. The success was attracting attention throughout the industry, but it was also creating new challenges that I hadn't foreseen. The most significant of these emerged on a Tuesday morning in April, when Jennifer knocked on my office door with an expression that mixed excitement with concern. "Maya, we need to talk about something that just came up," she said, closing the IT door behind her. "I received a call this morning from Amanda Rodriguez at Nexus Creative. They want to discuss acquiring Pinnacle Marketing." I felt my stomach drop. Nexus Creative was one of Denver's largest marketing conglomerates, known for acquiring smaller firms and integrating them into their corporate structure. An acquisition would mean significant changes to everything we had built at Pinnacle Marketing, including potentially ending our partnership with Sterling Digital. "What kind of timeline are they talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the implications racing through my mind. "They want to meet next week. Amanda said they've been watching our growth, particularly our innovative partnership model, and they're interested in scaling that approach across their client base." Jennifer sat down across from my desk, and I could see that she was as conflicted about this development as I was. "Maya, I want you to know that Robert and I haven't made any decisions about whether to pursue this opportunity. But we also can't ignore the financial implications. Nexus is talking about an acquisition price that would be life-changing for everyone involved." The rest of the day passed in a blur of internal meetings and strategic discussions. By late afternoon, it was clear that the Nexus Creative opportunity was serious enough to warrant detailed consideration, even if we ultimately decided not to pursue it. But as I drove home that evening, my thoughts weren't focused on acquisition, prices, or corporate integration strategies. I was thinking about Rachel and how this development would affect her situation at Sterling Digital. Our partnership had become crucial to her company's survival, and if Pinnacle Marketing was acquired by Nexus Creative, there was no guarantee that the partnership would continue. That realization led to a difficult decision. I needed to give Rachel advance warning about the potential acquisition, even though doing so violated the confidentiality that typically surrounded such discussions. But our professional relationship had become too interdependent for me to let her be blindsided by this development. I called Rachel that evening, asking if she could meet me for coffee the next morning. When she agreed, I could hear curiosity in her voice about the urgency of my request. Mountain Grounds was busier than usual when we met the next day, filled with the kind of ambitious young professionals who made Denver's business community feel dynamic and competitive. Rachel arrived, looking polished and confident, a stark contrast to the vulnerable woman who had called me months earlier to request help with the partnership. "You sounded serious on the phone," she said as we found a quiet corner table. "Is everything okay with the partnership? The client feedback we've been getting has been incredible." I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to share would complicate both of our lives in ways we couldn't predict. "Rachel, I need to tell you something confidential, and I need you to understand that I'm sharing this information because our professional relationship has become important to both of our companies." Her expression immediately became more serious, and I could see her shifting into the focused, analytical mode that had made her successful in sales. "Pinnacle Marketing has been approached about a potential acquisition. Nothing has been decided, and we're still in very preliminary discussions, but I wanted you to know because it could affect our partnership." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, and I watched her process the implications of what I had told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "Who's the potential acquirer?" "Nexus Creative. They're interested in our partnership model and want to scale it across their client base." "Maya, if Nexus acquires Pinnacle Marketing, Sterling Digital could lose access to the strategic capabilities that have been keeping us competitive." Rachel's business instincts had immediately identified the core threat. "Without this partnership, we're back to the same problems that led to our client losses last year." I nodded, confirming her assessment. "That's why I wanted to give you advance notice. I don't know what's going to happen with the acquisition discussions, but I thought you deserved to know about the possibility." Rachel stared into her coffee cup, and I could practically see her mind racing through various scenarios and contingency plans. When she looked up, her expression had shifted from concern to something that looked almost like determination. "Maya, what if there was a way to make sure the partnership continued regardless of what happens with Nexus Creative?" "What do you mean?" "What if Sterling Digital made an offer to acquire Pinnacle Marketing before Nexus Creative can finalize their proposal?" The suggestion caught me completely off guard. Sterling Digital acquiring Pinnacle Marketing would be a dramatic reversal of our current partnership dynamic, and it would require Sterling Digital to have financial resources I wasn't sure they possessed. "Rachel, does Sterling Digital have the capital for that kind of acquisition? And more importantly, would that even make strategic sense given our different business models?" "I don't know about the financial side, but I do know that our partnership has been generating revenue growth that nobody at Sterling Digital expected. Michael Torres has been talking about expanding our strategic capabilities, and he's been asking questions about how we might bring those capabilities in-house." As Rachel outlined her thinking, I began to see the logic behind her suggestion. Instead of Sterling Digital being dependent on our partnership for strategic services, they could acquire those capabilities directly. It would also ensure continuity for our shared clients and potentially create new opportunities for growth. "It's an interesting idea," I admitted. "But it would require Sterling Digital's leadership to completely rethink their business model. 6 months ago, they were eliminating creative strategy positions. Now you're suggesting they should acquire a company built around strategic creative services. Maybe that's exactly the kind of transformation Sterling Digital needs," Rachel replied. "We've learned from our mistakes, and we've seen how valuable strategic creative capabilities can be when they're properly integrated with sales and account management." Our conversation continued for another hour, during which Rachel outlined an increasingly detailed vision for how a Sterling Digital acquisition of Pinnacle Marketing might work. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself considering possibilities I had never imagined. But I also recognized that this conversation represented another fundamental shift in our relationship. 6 months ago, Rachel had been asking for my help to save her career. Now she was proposing a business strategy that would potentially make her my supervisor again, albeit in a very different context than our previous experience at Sterling Digital. "Rachel, if Sterling Digital did acquire Pinnacle Marketing, how would that affect our working relationship? You'd presumably be in a senior position within the combined organization." She considered the question carefully before answering. Maya, I think we've both learned that our collaboration works best when we focus on our respective strengths. If Sterling Digital acquired Pinnacle Marketing, I'd want you to continue leading the strategic creative functions while I focused on client relationships and business development. Her answer suggested a more mature understanding of our professional dynamic than either of us had possessed during our previous experience working for the same company. But it also raised questions about whether Sterling Digital's leadership would support that kind of collaborative approach. After our meeting, I spent the rest of the day researching the feasibility of Rachel's proposal. What I discovered was intriguing. Sterling Digital's revenue had grown significantly since our partnership began, and their financial position was stronger than I had realized. More importantly, their client retention had improved dramatically, which had strengthened their market position and potentially their ability to secure acquisition financing. That evening, I called Jennifer to discuss Rachel's suggestion. I was careful to present it as one of several options we might consider, rather than advocating for any particular approach to the Nexus creative situation. It's an interesting alternative, Jennifer said after I outlined the possibility. Sterling Digital certainly understands our business model better than Nexus Creative would, and there might be fewer integration challenges if we were acquired by a company we've already been partnering with successfully. We agreed to discuss the Sterling Digital option with Robert and to potentially explore it as an alternative to the Nexus Creative acquisition. But we also acknowledged that any decision would ultimately need to be based on what was best for Pinnacle Marketing's employees and clients, regardless of personal or partnership considerations. The next few weeks unfolded with a complexity that challenged my ability to balance personal and professional considerations. Nexus Creative's acquisition proposal was comprehensive and financially attractive, but it also involved significant changes to Pinnacle Marketing's culture and operating model. Meanwhile, Rachel was working behind the scenes at Sterling Digital to build support for their potential counteroffer. The situation came to a head during a Sterling Digital leadership meeting that Rachel later described to me in detail. Michael Torres had been skeptical about the acquisition proposal until Rachel presented a comprehensive analysis of how the combined company could compete more effectively against larger marketing conglomerates like Nexus Creative. The partnership with Pinnacle Marketing has been our most successful strategic initiative in years, Rachel had argued. Instead of risking that partnership by letting them be acquired by a competitor, we should be looking at how to make those capabilities a permanent part of our business model. Her presentation had been persuasive enough to convince Sterling Digital's leadership to authorize preliminary acquisition discussions, setting up a competitive situation between Nexus Creative and Sterling Digital for Pinnacle Marketing. When Rachel called to update me on these developments, I found myself in the surreal position of having two different companies competing to acquire the firm where I worked, with my sister serving as the primary advocate for one of the potential acquirers. Maya, I know this situation is complicated because of our relationship, Rachel said during our call. But I want you to know that my advocacy for Sterling Digital's acquisition isn't about our family dynamic. It's about what I genuinely believe would be best for both companies and for the clients we serve. I appreciated her directness, but I also recognized that the outcome of this acquisition process would have profound implications for our professional relationship. If Sterling Digital acquired Pinnacle Marketing, Rachel and I would once again be working for the same company, but in a very different context than our previous experience. The competitive acquisition process stretched over 6 weeks, during which both Nexus Creative and Sterling Digital conducted detailed due diligence, reviews of Pinnacle Marketing's operations, client relationships, and financial performance. As the department head most familiar with our strategic partnerships and client accounts, I found myself playing a central role in both evaluation processes. The experience was professionally validating in ways I hadn't expected. Both potential acquirers recognized the value of the integrated marketing approach I had helped develop, and both were interested in having me play a leadership role in their respective post-acquisition plans. Nexus Creative offered me a senior director position that would involve leading their strategic services division across multiple offices. It was a significant career advancement opportunity that would establish me as a senior executive within one of Denver's most prominent marketing organizations. Sterling Digital's offer was different but equally compelling. They proposed creating a new strategic marketing division with me as the founding director, reporting directly to their executive team and having authority over all creative and strategic functions across the company. It would essentially mean rebuilding Sterling Digital's approach to marketing services based on the integrated model we had developed through our partnership. Both offers represented career opportunities that exceeded anything I had imagined. When I was fired from my junior marketing specialist position just 8 months earlier, but they also required me to make a choice that would define not just my professional trajectory, but also my ongoing relationship with Rachel. The decision process was complicated by input from my parents, who had been following my career transformation with a mixture of pride and amazement. When I explained the 2 acquisition offers during a family dinner, their response revealed how much their perception of my professional capabilities had evolved. "Maya, either of these opportunities sounds incredible," my mother said. "Just a year ago, we were worried about your job security, and now you're being recruited for senior executive positions." My father's perspective was more strategic. "The question isn't which offer is more impressive," he said. "It's which opportunity will allow you to have the greatest impact and continue growing professionally." But it was my mother's next comment that crystallized something important about the decision I was facing. "I'm also curious about how this will affect your relationship with Rachel. You two have been through so much change over the past few months, and it seems like you've found a way to work together that benefits both of you." She was right that Rachel and I had developed an effective professional collaboration, but I wasn't sure whether that collaboration would survive the transition to working within the same organization again. Our partnership had worked partly because we represented different companies with complementary capabilities. Integrating those capabilities within a single organizational structure might eliminate the creative tension that had made our collaboration successful. These considerations led me to request individual meetings with both Jennifer and Robert to discuss not just the acquisition offers, but also my role in whatever decision Pinnacle Marketing ultimately made. "Maya, I want you to know that your preferences will carry significant weight in our decision," Robert told me during our meeting. "You've been instrumental in building the capabilities and relationships that have made us attractive to both potential acquirers. We're not going to make a decision that doesn't align with your professional goals." Jennifer's perspective was more personal. "I also want you to consider what kind of environment will allow you to continue growing and developing as a strategic leader," she said. "Both offers represent great opportunities, but they would put you in very different organizational contexts." Our discussions led to a framework for evaluating the 2 acquisition proposals based on cultural fit, growth opportunities, and strategic alignment with Pinnacle Marketing's core values. But they also made clear that my decision about which offer to support would be crucial to determining Pinnacle Marketing's future direction. The final presentations from both potential acquirers were scheduled for the same week in early June. Nexus Creative went first, presenting a comprehensive integration plan that would position Pinnacle Marketing as their strategic services division, while maintaining significant operational autonomy. Sterling Digital's presentation 2 days later was more personal and more focused on cultural alignment. Michael Torres and Rachel presented together, outlining a vision for how the combined organization would operate and emphasizing their commitment to preserving the collaborative approach that had made our partnership successful. What struck me most about Sterling Digital's presentation was how much Michael Torres's understanding of strategic marketing had evolved since my termination. The executive who had once told me that creative work needed to focus on supporting the sales team more effectively was now advocating for an organizational structure that positioned strategic creative thinking as central to the company's competitive advantage. But it was Rachel's portion of the presentation that proved most compelling. Instead of focusing on financial terms or operational logistics, she spoke about the cultural transformation that Sterling Digital had undergone through our partnership. Working with Pinnacle Marketing has taught us that our previous approach to creative services was fundamentally flawed, she said, looking directly at me as she spoke. We were treating strategic thinking as a support function rather than recognizing it as core to our value proposition. This acquisition isn't about gaining access to Pinnacle Marketing's capabilities. It's about fundamentally changing how Sterling Digital approaches client service. Her acknowledgement felt like a public validation of everything I had been trying to tell Sterling Digital during my time there. But more than that, it suggested that an acquisition by Sterling Digital might represent an opportunity to build the kind of integrated marketing organization that I had always envisioned. After both presentations concluded, Pinnacle Marketing's leadership team spent the following week in intensive discussions about which offer to accept. The financial terms were comparable, but the strategic implications were significantly different. During our final leadership meeting before making the decision, Robert posed the question that had been underlying all of our discussions. The fundamental choice we're making is between joining an established corporate structure where we'd be one division among many, or becoming the foundation for rebuilding an organization's entire approach to marketing services. Both have advantages, but they represent very different visions for our future. Jennifer's response captured what I had been feeling throughout the evaluation process. I think the Sterling Digital opportunity allows us to have greater impact and maintain more of what makes Pinnacle Marketing distinctive. But it also involves more risk because we'd be betting on Sterling Digital's ability to transform their organizational culture. When it came time for me to share my perspective, I found myself thinking not just about career opportunities or organizational structures, but about the personal journey that had brought me to this decision point. 8 months ago, Sterling Digital fired me because they didn't value strategic creative thinking, I said. Now they're offering to rebuild their entire organization around those same capabilities. That transformation represents something important about the evolution of our industry and about the power of persistence in advocating for what you believe in. I paused, looking around the room at colleagues who had become not just professional partners but genuine collaborators in building something innovative and valuable. But more than that, I think the Sterling Digital opportunity allows us to prove that integrated marketing organizations can compete successfully against larger, more fragmented competitors. If we can make this acquisition work, we'll have created a model that other companies can follow. My recommendation to accept Sterling Digital's offer was unanimous by the rest of the leadership team, and the decision was finalized the following day. As I called Rachel to share the news, I reflected on how dramatically our professional relationship had evolved over the previous year. Maya, I can't tell you how excited I am about what we're going to build together, Rachel said when I told her about our decision. I know there will be challenges as we integrate the two companies, but I genuinely believe we can create something that's better than what either organization could achieve independently. Her enthusiasm was infectious, but I also recognized that the real test of our collaboration would come during the integration process. We had learned to work together effectively as representatives of different companies, but managing the cultural and operational challenges of combining those companies would require new levels of communication and cooperation. The acquisition was finalized in late June, and I spent the summer working with Rachel and the rest of Sterling Digital's leadership team to develop integration plans that would preserve Pinnacle Marketing's innovative culture while scaling our capabilities. Across Sterling Digital's larger client base, the process was more complex than any of us had anticipated, involving everything from combining IT systems to aligning employee benefits packages. But the most challenging aspect was cultural integration, finding ways to blend Pinnacle Marketing's collaborative, strategic approach with Sterling Digital's more traditional sales-focused culture. My role in this integration process established me as something I had never been before, a true strategic leader whose perspective was sought, out and valued by senior executives across the combined organization. It was a level of professional recognition that validated not just my individual capabilities, but also the integrated approach to marketing that I had been advocating for throughout my career. As summer turned to fall, the integration was proceeding, successfully enough that we were able to begin pursuing new client opportunities that neither company could have handled independently. The combined organization's capabilities were attracting attention from larger companies that needed comprehensive marketing strategies, and our revenue growth was exceeding projections. But perhaps most importantly, the success of the integration was transforming how Rachel and I understood our professional relationship. Instead of competition or dependency, we had developed a true partnership based on complementary strengths and shared commitment to building something innovative and valuable. The ultimate test of that partnership was approaching, however, in the form of the largest client opportunity either of us had ever encountered. And how we handled that opportunity would determine not just the future of our newly combined company, but also whether our relationship as sisters could sustain the pressures of working together at the highest levels of professional responsibility. The call came on a Friday afternoon in October, just as I was preparing to leave the office for the weekend. Jennifer's voice carried an excitement that immediately captured my attention, even though she was trying to sound professionally composed. "Maya, we just received an RFP that I think you need to see immediately," she said. "It's from Westfield Industries." I felt my pulse quicken. Westfield Industries was one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Rocky Mountain region, with operations spanning from Denver to Salt Lake City. They were exactly the kind of enterprise-level client that our newly integrated company had been positioning ourselves to serve. But they were also notorious for their rigorous selection processes and demanding standards. "What kind of scope are we talking about?" I asked, already mentally shifting into strategic planning mode. "Complete brand repositioning and market expansion strategy. They're looking to modernize their entire market presence and expand into 3 new geographic regions over the next 2 years. The contract value would be our largest ever, potentially 8 figures over the contract term." I sat back down at my desk, recognizing that this opportunity represented far more than just a significant revenue source. Landing Westfield Industries would establish our integrated marketing model as a viable alternative to the traditional agency structures that dominated the enterprise market. It would also prove that the combination of Sterling Digital's client relationship capabilities and Pinnacle Marketing's strategic expertise could compete successfully against much larger organizations. "What's the timeline for the proposal?" I asked. "That's the challenge. They want initial proposals submitted in 3 weeks, with finalist presentations scheduled for mid-November. It's an aggressive schedule, but the opportunity is too significant to pass up." After ending the call with Jennifer, I immediately contacted Rachel to discuss the Westfield opportunity. Our working relationship had evolved to the point where we instinctively collaborated on major strategic decisions, but this opportunity would test our partnership in ways we hadn't previously experienced. Rachel arrived at my office within 30 minutes, carrying a thick folder of background research she had apparently been compiling on Westfield Industries for months. "I've been tracking their market activities since the integration began," she explained, as she spread documents across my conference table. "They've been struggling with brand consistency across their different product lines, and their geographic expansion has been hampered by inconsistent messaging and market positioning." Her analysis was thorough and insightful, revealing strategic challenges that aligned perfectly with our integrated approach to marketing solutions. But as we discussed the opportunity in more detail, it became clear that successfully pursuing Westfield Industries would require resources and coordination beyond anything either of our companies had previously attempted. "Maya, if we're going to compete for this contract, we need to assemble a team that demonstrates our full capabilities," Rachel said. "This isn't just about creative strategy or client relationships. It's about proving that we can manage complex, multifaceted marketing challenges at an enterprise scale." She was right. and her assessment led us to spend the weekend developing a comprehensive approach to the Westfield proposal. Instead of treating it as a traditional RFP response, we decided to position our submission as a strategic business consultation that would demonstrate our integrated methodology in action. The approach we developed was ambitious and risky. Rather than simply responding to Westfield's stated requirements, we would conduct our own analysis of their market position and competitive challenges, then present strategic recommendations that addressed not just their immediate needs, but also long-term opportunities they might not have considered. Monday morning, I called an all-hands meeting to discuss the Westfield opportunity with our entire team. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Everyone recognized the significance of the opportunity and the potential impact on our company's future. But the meeting also revealed the scale of the challenge we were undertaking. Successfully, pursuing Westfield Industries would require coordinating the efforts of 12 different team members across strategy, creative, digital marketing, and account management functions. It would also require me to function not just as a department head, but as a true project leader capable of managing complex, high-stakes client development. The next 3 weeks unfolded with an intensity that pushed everyone on our team to perform, at levels we hadn't previously reached. I found myself working 12-hour days, coordinating research efforts, reviewing creative concepts, and refining strategic frameworks that would form the foundation of our proposal. Rachel was equally committed, leveraging her client relationship expertise to understand Westfield's organizational culture and decision-making processes. Her insights proved invaluable in helping us tailor our approach to resonate with Westfield's leadership team and address their specific business concerns. But the most significant aspect of the Westfield pursuit was how it transformed my understanding of my own capabilities. Instead of focusing primarily on creative strategy or departmental management, I was functioning as a true business leader responsible for coordinating diverse expertise toward a unified strategic objective. The experience was professionally exhilarating, but also personally challenging. The stakes were high enough that failure would affect not just my career, but also the future of our integrated company and the livelihoods of everyone on our team. The pressure was unlike anything I had experienced, but it also felt like the natural culmination of the journey that had begun when I was fired from Sterling Digital nearly a year earlier. 2 weeks into the proposal development process, we encountered our first major obstacle. Westfield Industries announced that they were also considering proposals from 2 of the largest marketing conglomerates in the region, including Nexus Creative, the same company that had tried to acquire Pinnacle Marketing earlier in the year. The news was both discouraging and motivating. Competing against organizations with significantly more resources and established enterprise relationships would be challenging, but it also represented an opportunity to prove that our integrated approach could deliver better results than traditional agency models. Rachel's response to this development surprised me with its strategic sophistication. Instead of viewing the competition as a disadvantage, she suggested that we use it as an opportunity to differentiate our approach more clearly. Maya, the larger agencies will probably submit comprehensive but conventional proposals, she said, during one of our late-night strategy sessions. They'll offer impressive resources and established processes, but they'll also be constrained by their traditional departmental structures. Her analysis led us to refine our proposal strategy around the theme of integrated innovation, positioning our combination of strategic thinking and collaborative execution as a competitive advantage rather than just an alternative approach. The final week of proposal development was intense enough that several team members were essentially living at the office. I found myself not just managing the project, but also providing leadership and motivation for colleagues who were pushing themselves beyond their normal limits. But what struck me most during this period was how naturally I had assumed the role of organizational leader. The team was looking to me not just for strategic direction, but also for emotional support and confidence during a high-pressure situation. It was a level of leadership responsibility that I had never sought, but that felt organic to my developing professional identity. The proposal submission deadline was on a Thursday afternoon, and we used the entire morning for final reviews and refinements. By the time we submitted our materials, we had created what I genuinely believed was the most comprehensive and innovative marketing strategy proposal I had ever been involved with. But the real test would come during the finalist presentations, assuming we were selected to move forward in Westfield's evaluation process. The call came the following Tuesday morning. Westfield Industries had selected 3 finalists for in-person presentations, and we were among them. The presentation was scheduled for the following Thursday at Westfield's corporate headquarters in downtown Denver. Jennifer, Rachel, and I spent the intervening days preparing for what we all recognized would be the most important presentation in our company's history. The format would be a 90-minute session with Westfield's executive team, including their CEO, marketing director, and heads of their major product divisions. The night before the presentation, I lay awake thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Exactly 1 year earlier, I had been sitting in my apartment, devastated by being fired and uncertain about my professional future. Now I was preparing to present marketing strategy to one of the region's most successful companies, leading a team that included my sister in a collaborative partnership that neither of us could have imagined. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes Denver feel energetic and optimistic. I chose my outfit carefully, professional but creative, confident but not presumptuous. I wanted to embody the integrated approach that our proposal represented. Rachel met me at the office an hour before we needed to leave for Westfield's headquarters. She was dressed equally thoughtfully, and I could see that she was managing the same combination of excitement and anxiety that I was feeling. "Maya, whatever happens today, I want you to know that working with you on this proposal has been one of the most professionally rewarding experiences of my career," she said, as we reviewed our presentation materials one final time. Her comment touched me more deeply than I had expected. Our relationship had evolved so dramatically over the past year that I sometimes forgot how contentious and competitive it had once been. Now we were true partners, each contributing our strengths toward shared objectives. Westfield Industries' corporate headquarters occupied an entire downtown block, with a lobby that conveyed both tradition and innovation. As we were escorted to the executive conference room, I felt the familiar pre-presentation adrenaline that had become one of my favorite aspects of strategic consulting work. The Westfield executive team was impressive, accomplished professionals who clearly understood their industry and their competitive challenges. But what struck me immediately was their genuine interest in understanding our integrated approach, rather than simply evaluating our credentials or resources. I began the presentation by outlining our analysis of Westfield's current market position and the strategic challenges they faced in their planned expansion. Instead of simply restating their requirements, I presented insights about market opportunities and competitive dynamics that our research had revealed. The response was immediate and engaged. Westfield's CEO, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, interrupted my presentation several times to ask detailed questions about our methodology and assumptions. Her questions were sophisticated and demonstrated that she understood the strategic implications of our recommendations. Rachel's portion of the presentation focused on implementation planning and client relationship management. She outlined how we would coordinate activities across Westfield's different product divisions and geographic markets, emphasizing our ability to maintain consistency while adapting to local market conditions. But the most powerful moment in the presentation came when Dr. Chen asked about our company's own integration experience and how it informed our approach to Westfield's challenges. I looked at Rachel before answering, recognizing that this question gave us an opportunity to demonstrate the authenticity of our integrated methodology. Dr. Chen, our approach to integrated marketing is based on our own experience of successfully combining two different organizational cultures and capabilities, I said. We understand the challenges of maintaining strategic consistency while leveraging diverse expertise because we've navigated those challenges ourselves. Rachel built on my response by describing specific examples of how our integration had created capabilities that neither company could have achieved independently. Her examples were concrete and compelling, demonstrating that our integrated approach wasn't just theoretical, but had been proven through our own organizational experience. The presentation concluded with a comprehensive implementation timeline and success metrics that addressed both Westfield's immediate needs and their long-term strategic objectives. As we finished, I felt confident that we had presented our strongest possible case, regardless of the ultimate outcome. Dr. Chen's closing comments suggested that our presentation had made a significant impression. What I find most compelling about your proposal is that you've clearly thought beyond our immediate requirements to consider strategic opportunities we hadn't fully articulated ourselves, she said. That level of strategic thinking is exactly what we're looking for in a marketing partner. The drive back to our office was subdued, as all three of us processed the intensity of the presentation and tried to assess how it had been received. We wouldn't hear Westfield's decision for another week, but we all felt that we had represented our capabilities as effectively as possible. That afternoon, I found myself alone in my office, reflecting on how much my professional life had changed since being fired from Sterling Digital. The woman who had once been denied a promotion to senior marketing specialist was now leading strategic presentations to Fortune 500 companies and managing complex organizational integrations. But perhaps more importantly, I had discovered capabilities and interests that I hadn't known I possessed. The journey from individual contributor to organizational leader had revealed aspects of my professional identity that had been dormant. During my years of working within traditional corporate structures, the call from Westfield Industries came exactly 1 week later, on a Thursday morning that felt pregnant with possibility. Dr. Chen was calling personally, which seemed like a positive sign, but could also indicate a courteous rejection. Maya, I'm calling to let you know that Westfield Industries has selected your team for our brand repositioning and market expansion project, she said without preamble. Your proposal was exactly what we were looking for, and we're excited to begin working together. The relief and excitement were overwhelming, but Dr. Chen continued with comments that made the victory even more meaningful. I want you to know that your presentation was distinguished not just by the quality of your strategic thinking, but by the authenticity of your integrated approach. It was clear that you weren't just proposing a methodology. You were sharing an approach that you genuinely believe in and have successfully implemented. After ending the call, I sat in my office for several minutes, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The Westfield contract would transform our company's financial position and market credibility, but it also represented validation of the integrated marketing model that I had been advocating for throughout my career. Rachel appeared in my doorway, within minutes of the call ending, having apparently been monitoring for news as anxiously as I had been. "We got it, didn't we?" she said, reading the expression on my face. "We got it," I confirmed, and she immediately crossed the room to embrace me in a way that transcended professional congratulations. "Maya, do you realize what this means?" she said as we separated. "We're not just going to be implementing marketing strategy for Westfield. We're going to be proving that integrated organizations can compete successfully against traditional agency models." Her perspective captured something important about the significance of the Westfield contract. This wasn't just about our company's success. It was about demonstrating the viability of an organizational approach that challenged conventional industry structures. The next few months unfolded with a complexity and intensity that exceeded anything either Rachel or I had previously experienced. The Westfield project required coordinating activities across multiple markets and product lines while maintaining the strategic consistency that had been central to our proposal. My role evolved beyond strategic planning to include client relationship, management, team leadership, and organizational development. I found myself traveling regularly to Westfield's various facilities, presenting strategic updates to their executive team, and managing a project team that had grown to include specialists from both our original companies, but perhaps most significantly, the success of the Westfield project was attracting attention from other enterprise-level clients who were interested in our integrated approach. By spring, we were receiving inquiries from companies across the Rocky Mountain region who had heard about our innovative methodology and wanted to explore similar partnerships. The growth was professionally exciting, but also challenging. Success was requiring us to expand our capabilities and hire additional team members while maintaining the collaborative culture that had made our integration successful. During one of our quarterly strategy meetings, Robert Martinez made a comment that crystallized how much our company had evolved over the previous 18 months. "Maya, when we first hired you as a department head, we thought we were adding strategic capabilities to our existing operations," he said. "What we didn't anticipate was that your approach would fundamentally transform how we think about client, service, and organizational structure." His observation was accurate but also incomplete. The transformation hadn't been just about my individual contributions. It had been about creating an environment where integrated thinking could flourish, and where different types of expertise could be combined toward shared objectives. But the most meaningful validation of our success came during a family dinner in late spring, nearly 2 years after I had been fired from Sterling Digital. My parents were discussing our company's growth and the recognition we were receiving within Denver's business community. "Maya, watching your career develop over the past few years has been incredible," my mother said. "But what makes me proudest isn't just your professional success. It's seeing how you and Rachel have learned to support each other's strengths." She was right that our relationship had been transformed through our professional collaboration. The competitive dynamics that had once defined our interactions had been replaced by genuine partnership based on complementary capabilities and shared objectives. Rachel's response to our mother's comment revealed how much her own perspective had evolved. "Working with Maya has taught me that my assumptions about creative work were completely wrong," she said. "I used to think that strategic thinking and creative execution were separate functions, but our collaboration has shown me that the most effective marketing solutions integrate both approaches from the beginning." Her acknowledgement felt like the completion of a journey that had begun with her laughter when I told her about being fired. The sister who had once dismissed my work as making things look pretty now understood and advocated for the strategic value of integrated creative thinking. As summer approached, I found myself reflecting on the personal and professional transformation that had resulted from what initially felt like career catastrophe. Getting fired from Sterling Digital had forced me to seek opportunities that aligned with my actual capabilities rather than settling for positions that undervalued my potential. But more than that, the experience had taught me that professional fulfillment comes not from external recognition, but from finding environments where you can contribute meaningfully to objectives that matter to you. The satisfaction I felt from leading strategic projects and building collaborative teams was intrinsic rather than dependent on titles or compensation. The ultimate test of this understanding came in early summer, when I received a call from Amanda Rodriguez at Nexus Creative. The company that had tried to acquire Pinnacle Marketing was now interested in recruiting me individually for a senior executive position that would involve leading their strategic services division across multiple offices. The offer was financially attractive and professionally prestigious, representing the kind of corporate leadership opportunity that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. But as Amanda outlined the scope of the position, I realized that accepting it would mean returning to the kind of traditional organizational structure that had never allowed me to reach my full potential. "Amanda, I'm flattered by your interest, but I'm not looking to make a change right now," I said. "I'm involved in building something innovative here, and I want to see that process through to completion." Her response revealed that Nexus Creative's interest in me was based on their recognition of the success our integrated model was achieving. Maya, we're interested in you precisely because of what you've accomplished with your current company, she said. We want to scale that approach across our entire organization. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, during which Amanda made increasingly attractive offers designed to overcome my reluctance to leave. But by the end of the call, I was more convinced than ever that my future lay in continuing to build and refine the integrated marketing model, rather than trying to implement it within someone else's organizational structure. That evening, I called Rachel to tell her about Nexus Creative's recruitment offer and my decision to decline it. Her response surprised me with its emotional intensity. Maya, I'm so relieved that you're staying, she said. I know the Nexus offer was probably incredible, but I can't imagine building this company without your strategic leadership. Her comment made me realize that our professional partnership had become important, not just for our respective careers, but also for our relationship as sisters. We had learned to combine our different strengths in ways that made both of us more effective than we could be independently. As autumn arrived, marking the second anniversary of my termination from Sterling Digital, I found myself thinking about the unexpected journey that had brought me to my current position. The woman who had once been considered expendable creative support was now leading strategic initiatives for major corporate clients and building innovative organizational models. But perhaps most importantly, I had discovered that my value wasn't dependent on others recognizing it. The skills and strategic thinking that made me successful had always been there. I just needed to find environments where those capabilities could be fully expressed and appreciated. The transformation was complete, but it was also ongoing. Each new client project and organizational challenge provided opportunities to continue developing and refining the integrated approach that had become central to my professional identity. And as I looked toward the future, I felt confident that the foundation Rachel and I had built together would continue to evolve and grow, creating opportunities for both of us that neither could have achieved alone. The laughter that had once stung had become the catalyst for a journey that transformed not just my career, but also my understanding of what was possible when different types of expertise were combined with mutual respect and shared vision. The best revenge, I had learned, wasn't proving others wrong. It was proving yourself right in ways that created value for everyone involved. And that lesson had become the foundation for everything I was still building. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. You've demonstrated the kind of integrated thinking that makes our best campaigns successful. Robert nodded in agreement. We've been looking for someone who can bridge the gap between creative and strategy, and it's clear that you don't see those as separate functions. That's rare and valuable. They told me that they would make their final decision early the following week, and that I should hear from them by Tuesday or Wednesday. As I walked back to my car, I felt a surge of optimism that I hadn't experienced since before getting fired. Regardless of whether I got this specific position, the interview had shown me that there were places where my skills and approach were not just accepted, but actively sought after. But what I didn't know, as I drove home that Friday afternoon, feeling hopeful about my future, was that Monday morning would bring news that would change everything. And it would involve Rachel in a way that I never could have anticipated. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November air that makes Denver feel alive with possibility. I was in my kitchen, savoring my first cup of coffee in 3 weeks that I could drink slowly without rushing to get to an office, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. My heart jumped, hoping it might be Jennifer Liu from Pinnacle Marketing with early news about the position. Maya Chen speaking, I answered, trying to keep my voice professionally neutral, despite the butterflies in my stomach. Maya, this is Jennifer from Pinnacle Marketing Group. I hope I'm not calling too early. Her voice carried a warmth that immediately put me at ease, but I couldn't read whether the news would be good or disappointing. Not at all, Jennifer. Thank you for calling. I moved to my living room window, looking out at the mountains as a way to center myself for whatever came next. I wanted to reach out first thing this morning because, frankly, Robert and I couldn't stop talking about your presentation on Friday. Your strategic approach to the Morrison Tech Challenge was exactly the kind of integrated thinking we've been looking for. I felt my breath catch, but I forced myself to stay calm and listen. We'd like to offer you the marketing strategy manager position, but there's actually been a development over the weekend that we want to discuss with you. Jennifer paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Robert has been wanting to restructure our client services team, and your interview convinced him that now might be the right time. Instead of the strategy manager role, we'd like to offer you the position of department head for our new Integrated Marketing Solutions division. The words took a moment to register. Department head. I had gone from being fired as a junior marketing specialist to being offered a leadership role in less than a month. Jennifer, I'm honored, but I want to make sure I understand correctly. This would be a management position? Yes. You'd be overseeing a team of 4 marketing strategists and creative professionals, and you'd report directly to Robert. You'd also be the primary client contact for our major accounts. It's a significant step up from what we originally discussed, but based on your presentation and your background, we believe you're ready for this level of responsibility. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I couldn't get promoted from junior to senior specialist at Sterling Digital. Now I was being offered a department head position at a company I genuinely admired. What would the timeline look like for starting? We'd like you to begin next Monday if possible. I know that's quick, but we have several client projects that could benefit from your leadership, and we're excited to get started. Jennifer's enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself smiling despite my efforts to stay professional. Jennifer, I accept. Thank you for this opportunity. I won't let you down. I'm thrilled, Maya. Welcome to Pinnacle Marketing Group. I'll send over the offer details and paperwork this afternoon, and I'll set up some time for you to meet with your new team later this week. After we hung up, I sat in my living room in stunned silence. 3 weeks ago, I had been crying in this same spot, wondering how I was going to explain to my family that I'd been fired. Now I was going to be managing a team and working directly with major clients. The transformation felt almost surreal. My first instinct was to call someone and share the news, but I hesitated. My parents would be thrilled, but they'd also probably launch into a lengthy analysis of how this proved I should have been more aggressive about pursuing leadership opportunities earlier. David would be genuinely happy for me, but he was still at Sterling Digital, and I wasn't sure how much detail I should share about my new role. And Rachel. I wasn't sure I was ready to have that conversation yet. Part of me wanted to savor this moment privately before opening it up to family dynamics and comparisons. Instead, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood and let the reality of my new situation sink in. As I strolled down 13th Avenue, past the familiar coffee shops and bookstores of Capitol Hill, I found myself thinking about all the small moments over the past few years when I had felt undervalued or dismissed. The performance review where I was told to focus on supporting the sales team more effectively. The family dinners where Rachel's achievements overshadowed my contributions. The countless meetings where my ideas were implemented but never credited.